He should not have said it out loud. But once the words left her mouth, there was no pulling them back. You should have told me you were seeing someone. Sophie Harper stood in my doorway with her arms folded tight across her chest. Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that hides something sharp underneath. I blinked at her, confused. What are you talking about? Quote. Her eyes flicked toward my porch, toward the empty street where Lily's car had been parked 10 minutes earlier. The girl who kissed you, she said quietly. I saw it. Quote. For a second, my brain went blank. A friendly hug, a quick kiss on the cheek, nothing more. Yet the way Sophie was looking at me made it feel like I had betrayed her somehow. You don't owe me explanations, she added quickly, her voice tightening. We're just neighbors. But the way her fingers curled against her sleeves told a different story, and something inside my chest twisted when I realized one simple thing. Sophie wasn't angry. She was jealous. And the moment I understood that, everything between us suddenly felt dangerous. Because the truth was, if Sophie Harper cared enough to be jealous, then the feelings I had spent months pretending were harmless might not be harmless at all. My name is Lucas Grant. I'm 25 years old, and until that moment, my life had been painfully simple. I live in a quiet neighborhood called Greenview on the edge of Boise, Idaho, the kind of place where everyone waves when they drive by. Maple trees line the streets, and in the fall the leaves turn so bright it looks like the whole road is on fire. Nothing dramatic ever happens there. People fix their roofs. Kids ride bikes until sunset. Dogs bark at squirrels, and someone's lawnmower is always humming somewhere down the block. For 2 years, that peaceful routine was exactly what I wanted. I work as a freelance handyman. I fix broken outlets, leaky faucets, cracked fences, whatever my neighbors need. It's not glamorous, but it gives me freedom. No boss breathing down my neck, no office walls, just tools, coffee, and quiet days. When I'm not working, I bake. Banana bread mostly. Sometimes muffins. My kitchen usually smells like cinnamon or vanilla. Most evenings I sit on my porch with a mug of strong black coffee while an old record player hums beside me. Simple life, safe life. Then Sophie Harper moved in next door. Sophie is 33. She teaches art at the elementary school down the road. The first thing I noticed about her was how quiet she is. Not shy exactly, just thoughtful, like she's always carrying a story inside her head. The second thing I noticed were her eyes. Hazel, warm and soft, in a way that makes you feel like she's really listening when you talk. The first time she knocked on my door, she was holding a plate of cookies. I baked too many, she said with a small smile. That sentence became our tradition. Sometimes it was cookies, sometimes pie, sometimes lemon bars. She would bring baked goods, and I would fix something around her house in return. Loose cabinet hinge, squeaky door, a sink that wouldn't stop dripping. Fair trade. Soon it became more than that. Tea at her kitchen table. Long conversations about books, music, her students painting trees in colors that don't exist in real life. She didn't laugh loudly, but when she did laugh, it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Somewhere along the way, without realizing it, I started waiting for her knock on my door. And somewhere along the way, I started noticing things I probably shouldn't have. The way she hummed softly when watering her flower boxes. The way she tucked loose hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way her eyes softened whenever she talked about the kids she taught. Feelings grew slowly, quietly, and I ignored every single one of them. Because Sophie Harper was my neighbor. And some things are safer when they stay unspoken. Then came the day everything cracked open. It was a Saturday afternoon. I had just pulled a loaf of banana bread out of the oven when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Lily Carter burst inside like a small hurricane. Lily is 24, works in marketing downtown. Loud, energetic, and incapable of entering a room without talking. We met freshman year of college and stayed close ever since. She's basically my little sister. Lucas, she said, dropping her purse on the counter, tell me you still have that wrench set. Her dad's kitchen sink had exploded, apparently. We sat in my kitchen for almost an hour eating banana bread and catching up. Same easy conversation we'd always had. Nothing unusual. When she finally left, I walked her out to the porch. She wrapped me in a quick hug, then kissed my cheek. "You're the best," she said, heading down the steps. And that's when I heard the sound. A trash can lid closing next door. I looked up. Sophie was standing in her driveway. Still, silent, watching us. Lily waved casually. "Hey!" Sophie didn't wave back. Her eyes were locked on the spot where Lily had kissed me. For a second, something flashed across her face. Not anger. Something deeper. Something that looked painfully close to hurt. Then it disappeared. Her expression turned calm, distant, cold. I forced a smile and raised a hand. "Hey, Sophie, have a good weekend." She nodded once. "You too." Quote. Her voice was flat. Then she walked back into her house and shut the door. At the time, I told myself it meant nothing. People have bad days. People get tired. People get quiet. But that night, I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee and stared at her dark windows longer than I should have. Because the neighborhood felt different somehow. Quieter. Heavier. And over the next few days, the silence got worse. No knock on my door. No plate of cookies. No humming from her open windows while she watered flowers. Just distance. By Wednesday, I couldn't stand it anymore. So I baked apple cinnamon muffins. Her favorite. I walked next door and knocked. When she opened the door, her arms were crossed. "What's up, Lucas?" Quote. I held out the box. "I made too many." Her eyes dropped to the muffins, then lifted slowly back to my face. "That's nice," she said. A pause. Then the words landed like a brick. "But maybe you should give them to your girlfriend instead." Girlfriend. Suddenly everything made sense. She had seen Lily kiss me, and she thought Lily meant something else. I opened my mouth to explain. But Sophie looked away first. And for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something in her eyes that scared me. Not anger, not annoyance. Fear. The kind of fear people feel when they realize they might already be too late. And that's when I realized something even more terrifying. If Sophie thought I had a girlfriend, then maybe she cared far more than either of us had ever admitted. The moment Sophie said the word girlfriend, something inside me tightened. It wasn't just confusion. It wasn't even embarrassment. It was a sudden realization that the quiet, comfortable thing we had built between our houses might have been far more fragile than I ever allowed myself to admit. She stood there in her doorway with her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. But her eyes betrayed her. They kept drifting toward the street, toward the empty driveway where Lily's car had been earlier. I took a slow breath. "Sophie," I said gently, "Lily is not my girlfriend." She didn't answer right away. Her jaw moved slightly like she was considering whether she wanted to believe me. "She kissed you," she said after a moment. "On the cheek. That still counts." I couldn't help it. I let out a small laugh. Not because the situation was funny, because it suddenly felt painfully obvious what had happened. "She's like my sister," I explained. "We've been friends since college. That hug was goodbye. Nothing else." Sophie studied my face carefully. It wasn't the kind of look people give when they're searching for lies. It was the look someone gives when they're trying to decide if they're allowed to feel relieved. "Really?" she asked quietly. "I swear." The silence between us stretched long enough that I could hear wind moving through the maple trees down the street. Then something in her shoulders softened. Her arms slowly uncrossed. She reached forward and took the muffin box from my hands. "I guess I jumped to conclusions," she said. Her voice was softer now, almost embarrassed. "Maybe a little," I admitted. The corner of her mouth twitched like she wanted to smile but hadn't fully forgiven herself yet. "Come in," she said after a moment. I just made tea. Relief washed through me in a slow, warm wave. I stepped inside. Sophie's house always felt different from mine, warmer somehow. The air smelled like chamomile and cinnamon. Soft yellow lights glowed above the kitchen table. Paintings from her students covered the refrigerator door in bright, crooked colors. Everything about the space felt lived in, gentle. She poured tea into 2 mugs and slid one across the table toward me. For a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Work. The weather. One of her students who had painted a purple dog that somehow still looked proud of itself. But under the surface, something had changed. We both felt it. Every time our eyes met, there was a quiet hesitation that hadn't been there before. Eventually, I stood up to leave. Sophie walked me to the door. "Thanks for the muffins," she said softly. "Anytime." We stood there for a second longer than necessary, not touching, just aware of each other. Then I stepped outside into the cool evening air. That night I slept terribly. My brain kept replaying the same moment. The look on Sophie's face when she thought Lily was my girlfriend. The jealousy, the hurt, and the uncomfortable truth sitting behind it. She cared, maybe more than she wanted to. The next morning, my phone buzzed while I was pouring coffee. A text from Sophie. "Do you still have that book about indie artists you mentioned once?" I stared at the message longer than necessary. It was a small thing, but it felt like an olive branch. "Yeah, I can bring it by later," I replied. A few seconds passed. Then another message appeared. "Thank you, slightly smiling face." That tiny smiley face made me grin like an idiot. Later that evening, I walked over with the book. Sophie opened the door almost immediately. Her expression looked different from the day before. Softer, less guarded. She held out a small container. "Lemon bars?" she said. "Let me guess," I said. "You made too many?" She laughed, a real laugh this time. Something like that. I stayed for a while. We sat at her kitchen table flipping through the book. She asked questions about some of the artists. I told her which ones I liked and which ones I thought were overrated. The conversation felt normal again. Almost. But every now and then I caught her looking at me in a way she never had before. Not just friendly, curious, searching, as if she was seeing me from a different angle. That Saturday the weather turned perfect. The sky was bright blue, and the maple trees along our street had started turning red and orange. I found Sophie outside trimming her flower boxes. "You want to take a walk?" I asked. She hesitated only a second. "Okay." We walked side by side through the quiet streets of Greenview. Leaves crunched under our shoes. The air was cool enough to make the day feel sharp and alive. At first we talked about random things. A dog in the park chasing squirrels. A new bakery that had opened downtown. Then something funny happened. A squirrel ran straight across the sidewalk in front of us, nearly crashing into a golden retriever. The dog yelped. The squirrel froze, and Sophie burst out laughing. Not the quiet laugh she usually gave. This one was bright, full, unfiltered. It caught me so off guard that the words slipped out before I could stop them. "I missed that." She looked at me. "Missed what?" "Your laugh." The words hung in the air between us. Sophie's cheeks turned pink, from the cold air, or maybe from what I said. "You're good at making me laugh," she said quietly. For a moment, the world slowed. Wind moved through the branches above us. A few leaves drifted down between our feet. And suddenly the space between our hands felt different. Closer. Charged. I thought about reaching for her. I thought about telling her everything I had been avoiding for months. How every knock on my door made my day better. How the smell of her cookies meant comfort. How sitting across from her at that small kitchen table had quietly become the best part of my week. But fear held me back. Because if I said those things out loud, I could lose everything. That night I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee and finally admitted something to myself. The jealousy hadn't just revealed her feelings. It had exposed mine. And the truth was simple. I had been falling for Sophie Harper for a long time. I just didn't realize how far I had already fallen. 3 days later, I couldn't pretend anymore, so I walked next door. When Sophie opened the door, she looked surprised, but not unhappy. "Hey, Lucas, can we talk?" She stepped aside without hesitation. The smell of baked apples filled the kitchen. She leaned lightly against the counter while I tried to gather the courage to say what I came for. "What's on your mind?" she asked. I took a breath. "When you saw Lily kiss me, it bothered you." It wasn't a question. Her eyes flickered. She looked down at her hands. "I wasn't expecting it." she admitted quietly. Then she swallowed, and I realized something I didn't want to admit. My heart started pounding. What? She lifted her eyes slowly. Seeing someone else that close to you, she said softly. I didn't like it. Silence filled the kitchen. My pulse thudded in my ears. Why? I asked gently. She hesitated. Then the truth slipped out of her like it had been waiting too long. Because I think I care about you more than I should. And in that moment, everything between us changed. The moment Sophie said she cared about me more than she should, the room felt smaller, not in a bad way, just intense. Like the air between us had suddenly become heavier. She stood near the kitchen counter, with her hands loosely resting on the wood, her eyes fixed on the floor like she had just admitted something she wasn't sure she was ready to say out loud. For months I had imagined hearing those words. Now that they were real, my mind struggled to keep up. Sophie, I said quietly. She lifted her eyes. There was no anger in them now, no distance, just honesty. I didn't plan for it, she added quickly. You were just the neighbor who fixed my sink. A small smile slipped across my face. Yeah, I said softly. And you were just the woman who brought me too many cookies. Her lips curved slightly, but the tension between us remained. Because both of us knew something important had just shifted. I spent a long time keeping people at a distance, she continued after a moment. It felt safe that way. I didn't interrupt. She needed to say this in her own time. When my mom passed away, I learned something early, she said quietly. The closer you let people get, the more it hurts if they disappear. Her voice wasn't dramatic, it was calm, matter of fact. Like someone explaining a rule they had lived by for years. So I built walls, she said, carefully. Her fingers traced the edge of the counter. Then you moved in next door. I let out a slow breath. I didn't mean to ruin your system. You didn't ruin it, she said. She looked at me again. You made it harder to keep. That sentence landed somewhere deep in my chest. For months I had convinced myself our connection was just friendly, neighborly, safe. But hearing her talk now made it clear that both of us had been pretending. I kept telling myself it was just tea, she continued softly. Just conversations. Just cookies. She shook her head slightly. But then I saw that girl kiss you. Quote. The memory of that moment flashed back, her frozen expression in the driveway. That's when it hit me, she said. What did? That I didn't want you to belong to someone else. The words hung in the quiet kitchen. My heartbeat felt loud enough to hear. So you were jealous, I said gently. She looked embarrassed. A little. A little? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Okay, she admitted. More than a little. I laughed softly. The tension in the room eased just enough to breathe again. You know what the weird part is? I said. What? I was jealous too. Her eyebrows lifted. Of who? Anyone who might eventually take you away from this neighborhood. Her expression softened. You were? Yeah. I leaned against the opposite counter. I just didn't have a dramatic kiss scene to prove it. That earned a small laugh from her, but soon the quiet returned. The kind of quiet that comes right before something important happens. Sophie looked down at her hands again. I'm not very good at this, she admitted. At what? Letting people in. Quote. Her voice carried a trace of uncertainty now. I don't even know what this is. I stepped closer without thinking. The distance between us shrank to just a few feet. You don't have to define it right now, I said. Her eyes lifted slowly. But I don't want to lose you, she whispered. That sentence hit harder than anything else she had said. And suddenly the answer felt obvious. You won't, I said. The room felt warmer, quieter. My hand moved almost on its own, slowly, carefully, until my fingers touched hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled around mine. Soft, warm, real. For a second, we just stood there, two people holding hands in the middle of a kitchen, neither of us rushing the moment. Her eyes searched my face. You're sure? She asked quietly. About what? That you want this. I've wanted this longer than I realized. Her breath caught slightly. Then she took a small step closer. The space between us disappeared. Her free hand rested lightly against my chest. I could feel the warmth of her palm through my shirt. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "That's okay. What if we ruin everything?" I smiled gently. I think pretending we don't feel anything would ruin it more. For a moment she studied my face, like she was trying to memorize something. Then she leaned forward. The kiss started softly. Careful, like both of us were testing something fragile. But the second I kissed her back, the hesitation melted. Her fingers tightened around mine. My hand moved to her waist. And suddenly the months of quiet feelings, hidden glances, and unsaid words poured into that one simple moment. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It just felt right. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested together. Her breath was warm against my face. "I guess I really was jealous," she murmured with a tiny smile. I laughed softly. "I'm kind of glad you were." She shook her head. "Only you would say that." "Hey," I said. "If Lily hadn't kissed my cheek, we might still be pretending none of this existed." She thought about that. Then she smiled. "You might be right." Quote, "We stayed in that kitchen longer than planned, talking, laughing, letting the reality of what had just happened slowly settle in. Eventually, I headed home. But everything felt different now. The night air felt lighter, the quiet street felt warmer, and when I woke up the next morning, I couldn't stop smiling. Later that evening, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Sophie stood there holding a small basket. "I was thinking about making gingerbread cookies," she said. Her cheeks were slightly pink from the cold air. "Want to help?" I stepped aside immediately. My kitchen felt different with her inside. Warmer, closer. We worked side by side, mixing dough, cutting shapes, and laughing when flour dusted the counter. Our arms brushed more than once. Every small contact sent a quiet spark through me. "I like baking for people," she said while placing cookies on a tray. "It's how I show I care." "You don't have to prove anything to me," I replied. She paused, then looked at me in a way that made my chest tighten. "I know," she said softly. "That's what makes this new." Quote, "Those words stayed with me long after the cookies went into the oven, because something real had started between us, something honest, something fragile, and neither of us knew yet how much it was about to change our lives. The first time Sophie stayed late at my place, it wasn't planned. Nothing dramatic happened, no big moment, just time moving forward in a quiet, comfortable way. The gingerbread cookies had finished baking, and the smell of cinnamon and sugar filled my small kitchen. Sophie stood beside the counter, carefully sliding the warm cookies onto a plate while I leaned against the fridge watching her. She worked slowly, focused, like baking was something peaceful for her. "You're concentrating way too hard," I said. She glanced up with a playful look. "This is serious work." "They're cookies. They're good cookies." I laughed. Then she reached out and pressed one into my hand. "Careful. It's hot." I took a bite anyway. The sweetness hit immediately. "Okay," I admitted. "You win. These are dangerous." She smiled at that. The quiet moment lingered between us. Comfortable, easy. That was the thing about Sophie. Being around her never felt forced. Even silence felt full instead of awkward. We ended up sitting on my couch with the plate of cookies between us. The TV was on, but neither of us was paying attention to whatever movie was playing. Outside, the night air had turned colder. Winter was creeping closer. Sophie had her feet tucked under her legs, leaning slightly against the arm of the couch. Every once in a while, our shoulders brushed. Small touches. Natural, not rushed. "You know what's weird?" she said after a while. "What?" She looked down at the cookie in her hand. "I'm used to doing everything alone." Her voice was calm but thoughtful. "Coming home to an empty house. Making dinner for one. Watching movies by myself." I didn't interrupt. "But lately," she continued, "I find myself wondering if you're next door." She glanced at me. "Or if you're baking something." I smiled. "Most of the time, I am." She laughed quietly. Then her expression softened. "This feels new to me." "What does?" Quote, "Letting someone be part of my everyday life. I understood exactly what she meant. Honestly, I admitted, it's new for me too. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. You seem pretty comfortable. That's because it's you. She looked at me carefully after that, like she was measuring the sincerity behind the words. Then she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. The gesture was small, but it sent warmth through my chest. We stayed like that for a long time. Eventually, she glanced at the clock. Oh, wow, it's almost midnight. You can stay, I said without thinking. Her eyes met mine. There was no awkward tension behind the suggestion, just honesty. You don't have to drive home if you're tired. She studied my face for a second, then nodded slowly. Okay. That was how it started. After that night, Sophie began staying later more often. Sometimes we cooked dinner together. Sometimes we just sat on the porch, with blankets wrapped around us, while cold air drifted through the neighborhood. Other nights we talked for hours about small things that somehow felt important. One evening she told me about her mother. The story came quietly. Without warning, my mom passed away when I was 14, she said while tracing the rim of her coffee mug. I'm sorry, I said gently. She shrugged slightly. It was a long illness. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet sadness. After that, she continued, I learned not to depend on people too much. Because losing them hurts. Exactly. Her fingers rested lightly against mine on the table. But with you, she added softly, it feels different. How? She squeezed my hand gently. Because you stayed. Those two words landed somewhere deep inside me. I'm not going anywhere, I told her. She believed me. I could see it in the way her shoulders relaxed. Winter slowly settled over Greenview. The maple trees lost their leaves. Snow began covering rooftops and sidewalks. The whole neighborhood looked like a snow globe. Sophie started bringing more things over to my place. A sweater she liked wearing, a book she wanted to read together. Soon she had a toothbrush next to mine in the bathroom. None of it felt rushed. It just happened, naturally. One Saturday morning, we were outside shoveling snow from my driveway. Cold air bit at our cheeks while we pushed piles of snow toward the curb. At one point, Sophie slipped slightly on the ice. I grabbed her arm quickly to steady her. She laughed breathlessly. Okay, maybe I'm not built for winter sports. You did great, I said. You caught yourself. No, she replied, smiling up at me. You caught me. We finished shoveling and sat on the porch steps afterward, breathing hard. The sky above us had turned pale pink as the sun started to set. Snow sparkled across the quiet street. I never thought I'd feel like this, Sophie said suddenly. Like what? Like I don't have to protect myself all the time. I turned toward her. You don't. Not with you. She leaned her head gently on my shoulder, and for a long moment we simply watched the quiet neighborhood together. The weeks leading up to Christmas felt warm despite the cold weather. We decorated my small living room with string lights. She brought over ornaments her students had made from clay and paint. One of them was a crooked little snowman that made us both laugh every time we looked at it. We baked more than we probably should have. Cookies, pies, muffins. My kitchen smelled like sugar almost every night. One evening we were sitting on the couch while snow fell outside the window. The room glowed with soft holiday lights. Sophie turned toward me slowly. Her expression was thoughtful. I'm not used to being this happy, she admitted. You deserve to be, I replied immediately. She studied my face for a long moment. Then she said something that made my heart pound. I think I've loved you longer than I realized. The words felt quiet, but powerful. I took a slow breath. I've loved you since before I understood it, I admitted. Her eyes softened in a way I will never forget. On Christmas Eve, we walked through the neighborhood together. Every house glowed with warm holiday lights. Snow crunched under our boots. Halfway down the street, Sophie slipped her hand into mine. I'm ready, she said. For what? I asked. For whatever comes next with you. I stopped walking and turned toward her. The cold air surrounded us, but I felt warm. I love you, Sophie, I said. Her eyes filled with emotion. I love you too, Lucas. We kissed there in the quiet street under the falling snow. That kiss wasn't shy. It wasn't uncertain. It felt like a promise. And for the first time in my life, everything felt certain. But love is easy when life is calm. The real test comes when everything changes. And neither of us knew yet that change was already on its way. The night everything changed again started quietly. Too quietly. Sophie and I were sitting on my couch, the same place where we had spent dozens of evenings talking, laughing, or simply enjoying the quiet together. Her feet were tucked under my leg like they always were, and the soft glow from the lamp in the corner filled the room with warm light. A movie was playing on the TV. Neither of us was watching it. Snow tapped gently against the windows, and outside the neighborhood looked peaceful under a fresh layer of white. But something felt different. Sophie had been quiet most of the evening. Not distant, just thoughtful. Her fingers rested in mine, but her mind clearly wasn't in the room. Finally, I muted the TV. "What's going on?" I asked gently. She blinked, like she had been pulled out of deep thought. "What do you mean? You've been somewhere else all night." She looked down at our hands, then slowly pulled her legs out from under her and sat upright. "I got some news today," she said. The way she said it made my chest tighten. "Good news or bad news?" She hesitated. "I don't know yet." That answer wasn't comforting. "What kind of news?" She took a slow breath. "The school district in Portland offered me a position." The word Portland hung in the air. It felt heavier than it should have. "That's amazing," I said automatically. And it was. Sophie had worked incredibly hard with her students. She poured her whole heart into her art programs, often spending her own money on supplies when the school budget ran out. If anyone deserved recognition, it was her. But something in her expression told me the story wasn't finished. "What kind of position?" I asked. "Lead